basically the plan. So what is it to be a critical thinker? So critical thinking is the mental process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information to reach an answer or a conclusion. So in terms of critically thinking about literature, about writing, we are actively conceptualizing, actively applying, actively analyzing. All these things we're doing in an active way to look at a work from different angles, to look at a work from a deeper perspective. It's not just about reading to be entertained or reading to get the summary down, but actually looking at a work and analyzing what's its worth, the whys and the hows, so to speak. So, like I said, critical thinking talks about the whys and the hows, not the whats. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it basically means that you're not, to critically think about something, you're not just going to summarize it and tell this is what it said and then this and then this. We're actually going beyond that and looking at why did the work say what it said and how did it do it. So this means being analytical and not just descriptive. Yes, we've been talking about being descriptive in terms of sensory writing and helping the reader take part in your writing, but in this context, we're looking at descriptive in terms of summarizing the material and telling us what is there rather than why it's there. So how do we do that? Well, you give examples. You're going to actually take quotes from the text and show how that quote relates to what your point of view is about the topic. Give explanations, so explaining why things are the way they are, drawing comparisons that might happen if you were comparing two works in the textbook or a work that we've read in the class versus something else that you've read. You're actually comparing different works to draw conclusions on them. You could consider alternative approaches or explanations. So that's looking at the point of view from a different perspective. So the point of view that's presented in the work and looking at that perspective, and then look at the opposite perspective and how that would change what the work is saying. And you can discuss strengths and weaknesses. I think that it's important to understand that when we critically analyze a work, ultimately that work is meant to be read by a reader, and so your perspective on the writing is actually a critical point, because that writer really meant it to be read by an audience, and so the audience participation in the work is important. So you need to be able to determine the strengths of the work, the weaknesses, your actual viewpoint, your connections that you have with the work, ideas or theories presented. So this is what critical thinking does not do. So it does not pile up a bunch of information. So it's not just listing a bunch of facts. I think a lot of times in academic writing, this is something that people think effective writing is. They think that, if they're unbiased and just present the facts, and that's effective. And I don't think that's true. Effective writing presents a point of view and backs it up with evidence. In the same way, when we analyze literature or analyze different essays, we are coming to conclusions. We're basing our opinions on the evidence that's presented to us. So it's more than just piling on a bunch of information or creating a summary. It's not being too argumentative. I know that once we develop an opinion on something, we want to support that opinion. We want everyone else to agree with us. But if we become too argumentative, our opinion loses credibility. So keep in mind that if we become too overly zealous, it can take away from our point of view. It should not just share the negative. I think about, if we analyze each other's work, we don't want to just say, oh, that was dumb. It's not helpful. It doesn't really share anything intriguing or interesting. So just sharing the negative is not what critical thinking is. It's different than being, than criticizing someone. We're not saying that the work is stupid or anything like that. We're actually analyzing the details. And don't let your emotions get in the way of your ability to judge a topic or situation. There are going to be times that we might read something in this class that gets your gander up, that can really hit home, too close to home sometimes. So don't let your emotions take you away from the actual discussion and the ability to judge. So we are making judgments on the works that we read. We're making judgments in terms of their credibility, in terms of their the message that they're sending, in terms of the literary elements they use, and are they effective. So we do make judgments when we are readers, and that's okay. We can definitely do that. Just don't let your emotions take the place of sound judgment. So how do we apply this critical thinking to reading and writing? Well, critical thinking, when you're looking at literature or looking at different literary elements, you actually look at the elements of the text. So you're going to dive into the characters and the situation, the plot, the theme, the tone, all those literary details like metaphors and similes and that kind of stuff. And you're actually going to analyze those things. So looking at the characters, why does the author include these particular characters in the story? Even if it's a biographical story, something that is true, the author could choose to leave certain people out, or make sure that they focus on certain characters over other characters. So the development of a character, even in a biographical setting, is going to be important. Look at the situation. What is the critical element in the story, or the part of the story where it is coming to a climax? What are those situations in the story? Basically the plot line. What is the plot? But beyond the what, look at the why, look at the how. How does the writer present these things? Why does the writer present these things in the way that he or she does? So actually going beyond explaining what these are and going into the details of why they are. Looking at theme and tone, and how the tone affects the rest of the story, how the theme is permeated through the characters and through the plot. So looking at all of those elements and how they work together to form one main idea, one concept, or one impression that the author wants to make. So use comparisons and alternative viewpoints that can help you think critically about a work, especially if it's something that is presenting a viewpoint that disagrees with your own. So actually looking at it from the writer's perspective and looking at it from your perspective, comparing the work to other works in our textbook, or comparing the work to other works that you've read in the past, or even things that you research and look for. And then provide evidence to support your point of view. So if you say that a particular character is meant to represent evil, okay, so that might be a point of view that you're sharing. Well, you need to support that point of view with evidence. How do you do that? Well, you're going to share quotes from the story, share how these particular quotes line up with our traditional view of evil and that kind of stuff. So you're going to actually provide evidence to support your point of view. And that could come in the form of quotes, of paraphrases, of outside source material. Of course, we're going to cite that if we use it. So you would provide evidence to support your point of view. And then consider the strengths and the weaknesses. We can't just automatically assume because the text is in our textbook that it's great and it has no weaknesses. I think that nearly every writer is going to have both of these things. So actually consider those things and discuss why they are there, and why would the author leave that that element there. Perhaps an outside influence created a weakness, such as cultural or historical information, things that are going on during the time that the writer wrote it. And of course, keep summary to a minimum. Critical reading and writing, I don't want the summary to take the place of the critical thinking and the analysis. Instead, realize that the majority of the people that are reading what you are writing about have read the same thing you've read. So, such as in the discussion board this week, we're all going to be reading these 3 different narratives, so you don't have to spend most of the discussion board summarizing the narratives, because we've all read them. And that applies later on in the semester too, as we get into different essays and different assignments. You don't need to summarize in great detail the elements in the works that we discuss. Instead, spend your time analyzing those details. Yes, you can, introduce characters' names and that kind of stuff and make sure that we're all on the same page, but summary should really be minimized as much as possible. So these are the critical reading strategies that I'd like you to think about as you work toward the discussion board this week and as we move throughout the semester analyzing different pieces of writing. And ultimately, we do this because being good readers can help us to become good writers. So we learn about why and how certain writers are effective in the way that they present information from different types of essays. So if we're writing narratives, we read narratives. And why are these particular narratives effective? And being able to analyze that can help us become better writers ultimately, because we can pattern our writing after effective writers. So let's look at these strategies. The first thing that you want to do when you are looking at a text is preview it. You don't want to go charging in and just read it straight away. If you're actually trying to really understand, comprehend, and analyze the work, you really need to spend some time doing those things and preparing to read the work. So the first thing would do to preview. Learn about the text before really reading it. Look at the title, the author, the date that it was published. If our textbook is great because it actually has biographical information about each of the authors before the story is presented. So in the narratives that we're reading this week, you could actually read about the particular author of each of those essays. So that's really cool that we have in our book. But if you're reading something outside of our book, you can also do research to learn about the author, but previewing those elements. Now, why would you do that? Well, it's so you can contextualize the information that's going to be in the reading. So for instance, if you find out that the author is writing the work in 1946 in the United States South, it's going to be a lot different perspective than if it were written today in your hometown, because the historical context is different, the cultural context is different, and you can get a better picture of where the author is coming from. So finding out information about the text before reading it can help you contextualize the information, putting it in the context of the time that it was written, of the culture it was written, of the historical era it was written in. I think about, modern day women's writers versus 1920s women's writers. Well, in the United States in the 1920s, what was going on? It was the suffrage movement, trying to get the vote for women, so on and so forth. Are those same problems going on now? No. Women writers are writing about different things. So placing things into historical and cultural context can help you understand the point of view of the writer before reading it. Then once you have previewed, once you have contextualized the work, you need to start trying to develop questions in your mind. You could even write them down that will help you through the reading. So for instance, if you have the title of the work, perhaps you can create a question based on the title. So for instance, we're reading Audre Lorde's The 4th of July. Okay, the title is The 4th of July. Ask a question about it. What is the author trying to tell about the 4th of July? How is Independence Day important to this story? And what is happening? So you can actually create these questions in your mind, and then when you start to read the work, you can answer those questions in your mind. So you're basically analyzing as you go in your reading. Then once you have read the work, which I actually suggest when you read a work that you're going to analyze, to try to read it slowly, so you really get a clear understanding of what it is. Sometimes if you're having a particularly difficult time with a section, reading that out loud can help even more, because you're not only seeing the text, but you are hearing the text as well. And make sure that you're looking for words that you don't know and actually looking up the meaning of them so you have a full understanding of what you're reading. And then once you've read, spend some time reflecting on the information. So reflect on the piece. Does it challenge your beliefs or your personal values? Does it hit on you at any emotional level? So you're actually going to examine your personal responses to the work that you're reading. And I think I've mentioned it before in class that If you like or dislike a work, that is a viable form of analysis, because ultimately, any type of writing outside of writing in your journal, your diary, is meant for an audience. So the reaction, the interpretation that the audience has on a work is an important part of criticism. So definitely reflect on your own personal response to the work that you are looking at as part of your critical thinking. Then you can work on outlining and summarizing, but the point of that would be to make sure that you understand the content of what you read. So you're identifying the main ideas and restating them in your own words, making sure that you have a full understanding. And then evaluate the argument. So if the writer is trying to create a main idea or an argument, a point of view, then it's your job to test it. So is the point of view logical? Is it credible? And does it have an emotional impact? So you're actually evaluating the importance of and the impact of the particular argument that's being made. So if, for instance, if the author has challenged one of your beliefs or your values, have they effectively changed your mind, or at least got you to think about that particular value or belief and determine if what you think is right versus what they think is right? So actually evaluate the argument. That's, determining the impact. But then also, is it logical? Does it have a clear progression of ideas? Is it credible? If it's a first person narrative, that's something that they personally experience, then you could probably find that it's credible in terms of you can't take away someone's personal experience, but as we move throughout the course, we may be reading things that go beyond just a personal experience, and then you can also test that logic and credibility element as well. And finally, start to compare and contrast the work. So then we are making connections with the work. Connections with our own life, like we did with our personal responses, but also connections with other works that we've read. We're going to read 3 narratives this week, so you can make connections between the narratives that we've read. You can also make connections between other things that you've read, or even your narrative essays that you're writing right now. So you're actually exploring likenesses and differences between texts to understand them better. So for instance, if a particular narrative in the textbook is relative to what you are writing for our class, you can share those comparisons and how are they similar, how are they different, which one is more effective, or how would that influence your own writing, and so on and so forth. So these are all different strategies to apply critical thinking to our class reading.